In September 1983, the Cold War was not frozen. It was tense, unstable, and dangerously close to slipping out of control. Relations between the United States and the Soviet Union had reached one of their lowest points in decades. Political rhetoric was aggressive. Military exercises were growing more realistic, and both sides believed that the other might be preparing for a surprise nuclear strike. Inside this atmosphere of fear, the Soviet Union relied heavily on a new system designed to guarantee early warning and immediate response. That system was meant to remove human doubt. Deep inside a classified command bunker near Moscow, Soviet officers monitored satellite data capable of detecting American intercontinental ballistic missile launches within seconds. The logic was simple and terrifying. If the system detected a launch, the Soviet leadership would have only minutes to decide whether to retaliate. There would be no time for investigation, no room for hesitation. Speed was survival. Stanislav Petrov was one of the officers assigned to this system. He was not a member of the political elite, not a decision-maker, and not someone whose name was meant to matter. His responsibility was narrow but absolute. Assess incoming data and report it up the chain of command. He was not authorized to interpret American intentions or question the system's conclusions. His role existed to ensure that information flowed upward without delay. Shortly after midnight on September 26th, the warning screens changed. The system reported that a missile had been launched from the United States. Then another, then several more. According to the software, this was not a simulation or test. It was the beginning of a nuclear attack. In that moment, Soviet doctrine allowed for only one interpretation. An American strike was underway. The warning system had been built specifically to detect this scenario. Years of intelligence analysis had conditioned Soviet leadership to believe that the United States might attempt a limited first strike to disable Soviet command before a full-scale war. The data seemed to confirm that fear. Petrov was expected to report the alert immediately as a confirmed launch. Instead, he hesitated. Something about the situation felt wrong. The number of detected missiles was small. Too small? A real American first strike, Petrov reasoned, would involve hundreds of warheads, not a handful. The logic of nuclear war did not support what the system was showing. The technology insisted the threat was real, but strategy suggested otherwise. Petrov understood the consequences of hesitation. If he reported a false alarm as real, the Soviet Union might respond with nuclear weapons, triggering a war that would kill millions. If he dismissed a real attack as false, the Soviet Union could be destroyed without retaliation. The system had been designed so that officers like him would not face this kind of judgment. And yet, here it was. Against protocol, Petrov reported the alert as a system malfunction. For several minutes, the bunker existed in a state of silent tension. Everyone waited for confirmation from ground-based radar systems, which would detect incoming missiles if the launch were real. Those minutes stretched unbearably. If the satellites were correct, the radar would soon confirm it. If not, the world would continue unchanged. No missiles appeared. The alert was eventually classified as a false alarm. Later analysis revealed that the satellite system had misinterpreted reflections of sunlight off high altitude, clouds as missile launches. A technical flaw, combined with political paranoia, had nearly initiated a nuclear response. At the time, no one called Petrov a hero. His decision exposed weaknesses in Soviet technology and doctrine. The incident embarrassed the system, so it was buried. Official reports were rewritten. Responsibility was blurred. Silence returned. But the deeper story was not about a machine failure. It was about interpretation. The United States had no aggressive plan that night. There was no secret strike, no deception. The danger came from how those plans were imagined inside Soviet systems built on fear. One officer misread the situation according to doctrine, and by doing so, may have understood reality more clearly than the system, designed to protect the country. In the hours following the false alarm, the Soviet military command moved quickly to contain what had happened. The incident was immediately classified at the highest level. Logs were sealed, reports rewritten, and language carefully adjusted to minimize the appearance of failure. Officially, there had been a technical irregularity, nothing more. There was no mention of how close the system had come to triggering a nuclear response, and no acknowledgement that a single officer's judgment had overridden automated warnings. For Stanislav Petrov, the aftermath was unsettling. Rather than praise, he faced criticism. According to regulations, his role was not to analyze probabilities or question strategic logic. His duty was to report what the system showed. By labeling the alert as a malfunction, he had violated protocol. From the perspective of the command structure, this was a dangerous precedent. If officers began to doubt automated warnings, the entire logic of rapid retaliation could collapse. Inside Soviet intelligence circles, including the KGB, the incident caused quiet unease. At the time, the USSR was operating under Operation Rian, an intelligence program designed to detect signs of an imminent American nuclear attack. Analysts were trained to treat ambiguous indicators as potential evidence of hostile intent. Political rhetoric, NATO military exercises, and technological developments were all interpreted through a lens of suspicion. The false alarm fit perfectly into this mindset. The system detected missiles because everyone expected missiles. Petrov's hesitation disrupted that narrative. He had not dismissed the data outright. He questioned its meaning. This distinction mattered. The early warning system functioned exactly as designed. It identified a signal and escalated it. The failure lay in interpretation, not detection. Yet acknowledging this would mean admitting that the system itself could generate catastrophe without any enemy action. Subsequent internal reviews confirmed that the satellite system had critical limitations. It relied on specific lighting conditions and patterns that had not been fully tested under real-world scenarios. Sunlight reflections, combined with orbital geometry, could create false positives. Engineers understood this risk, but the system had been deployed anyway under political pressure to close perceived gaps in early warning. These findings were kept internal. Public acknowledgement would undermine confidence in Soviet deterrence. Within the KGB, some analysts began to question long-held assumptions about American intentions. There was no evidence that the United States had planned a limited missile strike that night. No covert operation, no strategic deception, no exercise that could be misread. The danger had not come from Washington. It had emerged from the interaction between technology and fear inside Soviet decision-making structures. This realization was deeply uncomfortable. For years, intelligence work had focused on uncovering secret American plans. The assumption was that catastrophe would come from hidden aggression. The Petrov incident suggested a different threat, self-generated escalation. The system was capable of creating its own enemy based on expectation alone. Despite this, no structural changes followed. The warning systems remained active. The protocols remained rigid. Speed continued to be prioritized over reflection. The lesson was learned quietly and incompletely. No doctrine was rewritten to encourage doubt. No training emphasized hesitation. The burden of judgment remained unofficially placed on individuals. Without protection or recognition, Petrov returned to routine duty, carrying the psychological weight of the decision alone. He later described the experience as isolating rather than heroic. He had been forced to choose between obedience and logic. With no guidance and no margin for error, the system had assumed certainty would always exist. That assumption had nearly ended everything. As months passed, the Cold War continued uninterrupted. Military exercises intensified. Political tensions remained high. The world moved forward, unaware that it had nearly been destroyed by a reflection of sunlight, interpreted through fear. What made the story darker was how little changed afterward. The incident was treated as an anomaly rather than a warning. Yet beneath the silence, a truth lingered among those who knew the details. Nuclear peace depended not only on strategy and strength, but on moments of doubt inside systems designed to eliminate doubt entirely. As time passed, the incident involving Stanislav Petrov did not disappear. It settled quietly into the background of Soviet military thinking, shaping attitudes without ever being acknowledged openly. Within closed circles, officers understood that the early warning system had revealed a fundamental weakness. It could detect signals with speed and precision, but it could not understand intent. It could only demand escalation. This realization clashed directly with the logic of Soviet deterrence. Nuclear strategy relied on the belief that certainty could be engineered. Automation was meant to remove human hesitation, because hesitation was seen as vulnerability. The Petrov incident exposed the opposite truth. In the most critical moment, hesitation was the only thing that worked. For the KGB, the implications were especially unsettling. Throughout the early 1980s, Soviet intelligence was consumed by Operation Ryan, a massive effort to identify signs of an imminent American first strike. Analysts were instructed to assume hostile intent behind ambiguous actions. Political speeches, troop movements, economic indicators, even changes in lighting, patterns in government. Buildings were scrutinized for meaning. Fear was institutionalized. The false alarm fit perfectly into this framework. The system reported missiles because everyone expected missiles. Technology did not create panic on its own. It amplified what intelligence culture had already prepared to see. Petrov's decision cut through that amplification. He did not analyze political context or intelligence assessments. He focused on logic. A limited American strike made no strategic sense. The absence of radar confirmation reinforced his doubt. What disturbed Soviet planners was that Petrov's reasoning had no place in official doctrine. The system assumed that the enemy's intentions would always be aggressive, and that speed was the only defense. This left no room for ambiguity. Yet nuclear reality was built entirely on ambiguity. Signals could be misread, data could be incomplete, time could distort judgment. Despite these insights, institutional change was minimal. Acknowledging that the system required disobedience to function safely would undermine its credibility. Publicly admitting the risk of false alarms could weaken deterrence by suggesting uncertainty. As a result, the incident was treated as a technical anomaly rather than a conceptual failure. Petrov himself became a quiet liability. He was not punished severely, but he was not rewarded either. His actions embarrassed the system by revealing its dependence on individual judgment. Silence was the safest outcome. He returned to routine duties, carrying the memory of that night without acknowledgement or support. Meanwhile, the international situation remained volatile. NATO exercises grew more complex and realistic. Communication procedures increasingly resembled wartime protocols. From the Soviet perspective, these activities blurred the line between preparation and intent. Each new exercise reinforced the belief that the United States might attempt to disguise a real attack as routine activity. This environment made the Petrov incident even more dangerous in hindsight. It demonstrated how easily a future false alarm could be interpreted as confirmation of long-held fears. The margin for error remained razor-thin. The system still demanded immediate response. The difference between peace and catastrophe still depended on interpretation. Inside intelligence circles, some officers began to question whether deterrence itself was sustainable under such conditions. If survival depended on individuals doubting machines, then the system was inherently unstable. Yet these doubts remained private. Official doctrine did not change. Automation continued to expand, justified by the need for speed. The deeper meaning of the incident was not that one officer had saved the world, but that the world had been saved by a flaw in the system. The flaw was human doubt. It had no place in doctrine, no protection in protocol, and no recognition in history at the time. By the mid-1980s, the Petrov incident had become an unspoken reference point. It was not cited, but it was remembered. It lingered as a silent warning that nuclear stability was more fragile than anyone publicly admitted. The danger did not lie solely in enemy plans. It lay in how those plans were imagined, interpreted, and amplified by systems built on fear. And as the Cold War continued, that danger remained unresolved, waiting for another signal, another misinterpretation, and another moment when someone would have to decide whether to trust the system or doubt it. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union had begun to change on the surface, but the systems that governed nuclear decision-making remained largely untouched. Political rhetoric softened slightly, arms control talks resumed, and communication channels reopened. Yet beneath these developments, the core logic of deterrence stayed intact. Early warning systems were still expected to provide certainty in a world defined by uncertainty. The contradiction exposed by the Petrov incident was never resolved. Inside military and intelligence institutions, confidence in technology was publicly reaffirmed, but privately questioned. Engineers improved software filters and adjusted satellite parameters, attempting to reduce the risk of false positives. These technical fixes were necessary, but insufficient. They addressed how signals were detected, not how they were interpreted. The assumption that data equaled truth remained embedded in doctrine. For the KGB, the incident reinforced a growing anxiety about misinterpretation. Operation Rian continued, but its limits became clearer to those who looked closely. Intelligence indicators multiplied, but meaning became harder to extract. Every ambiguous signal could be interpreted as preparation for war. The system did not distinguish between possibility and probability. It treated both as threats. This environment placed enormous pressure on individuals throughout the chain of command. Officers understood that hesitation could be career-ending, or worse. The structure rewarded conformity and punished doubt. Petrov's decision stood as a quiet exception, not a model. His case was never used in training, never cited as guidance. It existed only as an unspoken reminder of how close the system had come to failure. Petrov himself drifted further into obscurity. He left active service, carrying the psychological burden of the night alone. There were no debriefings designed to process what he had experienced. No institutional mechanism existed to absorb the emotional cost of making such decisions. The system required obedience, not reflection. As years passed, the incident faded from institutional memory, but not from its consequences. The logic that had nearly led to catastrophe remained operational. Nuclear forces stayed on high alert. Automated warning systems continued to operate under pressure to deliver immediate answers. The margin for human judgment remained narrow and unofficial. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union did fragments of the story begin to surface. Former officers spoke cautiously. Journalists pieced together accounts from declassified materials and personal testimonies. The narrative that emerged shocked the public. It suggested that the Cold War had not been held in balance by perfect strategy, but by moments of hesitation that doctrine did not allow. This revelation reframed the meaning of deterrence. Stability had not been guaranteed by strength alone. It had depended on individuals who questioned what they were seeing, even when the system demanded certainty. The Petrov incident became a symbol, not of heroism in the traditional sense, but of vulnerability. The deeper implication was uncomfortable. If nuclear peace depended on disobedience, then the system itself was unsafe. If survival required doubt, then certainty was a liability. These conclusions challenged the foundations of Cold War strategy and raised questions that extended beyond one country or one moment. As the world moved into a new era, the technology of early warning continued to evolve. Sensors became more advanced, algorithms more complex, yet the fundamental problem remained unchanged. Machines could detect patterns, but they could not understand intent. They could escalate faster than humans could reflect. The Petrov incident did not end the danger. It revealed it. It showed how easily misinterpretation could become annihilation, and how thin the line between peace and catastrophe truly was. That line had not been erased by the end of the Cold War. It had simply become less visible. And in that sense, the night of September 26, 1983 was not an isolated moment. It was a warning, one that remained unresolved, embedded in systems still designed to act faster than humans could think. The night of September 26, 1983 ended without explosions, without sirens, and without the world ever knowing how close it had come to destruction. The warning screens were reset, reports were filed, and silence returned to the bunker. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath that calm, a disturbing truth remained. The system designed to prevent nuclear war had nearly caused one. Stanislav Petrov's decision did not alter Soviet doctrine. It did not reform early warning procedures or slow the logic of rapid retaliation. Instead, it was quietly absorbed and hidden. The Soviet Union could not acknowledge that survival had depended on doubt rather than obedience. Doing so would undermine the very foundations of deterrence, which relied on certainty, speed, and the appearance of control. When the Cold War ended, the story eventually surfaced, often simplified into a tale of individual heroism. Yet this version missed the darker lesson. Petrov had not saved the world because the system worked. He had saved it because the system failed, and he chose not to follow it blindly. The protocols in place that night would have escalated a false signal into real war within minutes. The only safeguard was a human judgment that the system neither required nor protected. The incident also reframed the idea of enemy intent. There had been no secret American plan, no hidden first strike, no deception concealed within routine activity. The United States had not acted aggressively that night. The catastrophe had emerged from expectation, fear, and interpretation. The Soviet Union had prepared so intensely for war that it nearly created one itself. For intelligence services, this realization was deeply unsettling. It suggested that the most dangerous threats were not always external. They could arise internally, from the interaction between technology, doctrine, and psychology. Early warning systems could detect signals, but they could not understand context. Intelligence assessments could identify risks, but they could also amplify paranoia. In such an environment, certainty became dangerous. Petrov's case revealed a paradox at the heart of nuclear deterrence. The system demanded absolute obedience, yet depended on disobedience to survive. It required speed, yet survived because someone slowed down. It promised control, yet relied on chance. These contradictions were never resolved. They were simply buried beneath secrecy and time. Decades later, nuclear weapons remain on alert in multiple countries. Automated warning. Systems still operate under pressure to deliver immediate conclusions. The balance between machine certainty and human judgment remains unresolved. The conditions that made the Petrov incident possible have not disappeared. They have evolved. The deeper meaning of that night is not that one officer misread American plans and saved the Soviet Union. It is that the plans were never the real danger. Misinterpretation was. The belief that technology could eliminate doubt nearly ended everything. History often records wars, not the moments when war almost happened, The night of September 26, 1983 passed unnoticed, leaving no visible mark. But its lesson remains. In a world built on certainty, survival may depend on doubt. And as long as systems exist that demand instant answers to ambiguous signals, the question raised by that night remains unanswered. Will the next person trust the system or question it?